My parents took me to court for buying a house. That house belongs to your sister. Hi, my name is Linda. I never thought my own parents would drag me to court over a house I purchased with my own hard-earned money, but here we are. 4 months ago, I finally had enough saved for a down payment on a stunning craftsman-style home in Maplewood Gardens, the neighborhood I'd been fantasizing about for years. After 6 years working as a financial analyst at Summit Capital Group, I'd scraped together every penny, cutting back on vacations, packing homemade sandwiches for lunch, and driving my beat-up Toyota Camry long past its expiration date. Linda, sweetheart, we're so proud of you, Mom gushed over dinner the night I told them. Her famous chicken casserole sitting between us. Your father and I never managed to buy property until our late 40s. Dad nodded, setting down his glass of iced tea. Smart investment. Property values in Maplewood Gardens have been climbing steadily for the past 5 years. You made the right choice, kiddo. My younger sister, Melissa, smiled tightly from across the table. Yeah, congrats. Must be nice having that finance salary while some of us are still paying off grad school loans. Come on, Mel, I said, trying to keep the mood light. You're doing amazing at Sterling and Rhodes. That legal assistant position is just the beginning. You'll get there. Dad cleared his throat, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Speaking of property, Linda, you remember the discussions we had about family assets a couple years back? I blinked. What discussions? Mom and Dad exchanged one of those looks, the kind that made my stomach twist, even though I couldn't quite understand why. Never mind, Mom said quickly, her smile a little too bright. This is your celebration dinner. Who wants apple pie? 3 weeks later, I was at the closing table with my realtor, Karen Martinez, signing what felt like 1,000 documents. Congratulations, Linda, Karen said warmly, sliding the deed across the polished oak table. How does it feel to be a homeowner? Surreal, I replied, my hand trembling slightly as I signed my name with a flourish. Good surreal, though. Any big renovation plans? Nothing major. Maybe refinish the hardwood floors, update the kitchen backsplash. My phone buzzed insistently in my purse. I glanced down to see 3 missed calls from my best friend Claire and a text that made my blood run cold. Call me now. Your sister just posted something insane on Facebook about your house. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Karen. I need to take this. 25 minutes later, I was sitting in Claire's living room, staring at her laptop screen in complete disbelief, reading Melissa's Facebook post for the 4th time. When your parents promised you your grandmother's inheritance money for a house, but your sister somehow swoops in and buys one first broken heart face with steam from nose #betrayed #family drama nauseous, I muttered, my hand shaking. Claire leaned forward on her gray sectional, concern etched across her face. You told me the house isn't connected to your grandmother's money, right? Not at all. I saved every single penny myself. Grandma and Grandpa left some money when they passed, but that was divided equally between me and Melissa 3 years ago. I used mine to pay off my student loans and build an emergency fund. Then what the hell is she talking about? My phone rang. Dad's name flashed across the screen. I put the phone on speaker, my hand trembling. Hello? Linda. We need to talk. Dad's voice sounded unnaturally formal, almost robotic. Your mother and I have consulted our attorney about the situation regarding your house purchase. What situation? I demanded, feeling Claire's hand grip my shoulder. What are you talking about? The funds that were designated for Melissa's future home, he said coldly. We've always been clear that your grandmother wanted her inheritance to go toward Melissa's first house. Since you received the larger portion for your education, my mouth fell open. That's absolutely not true. I never heard anything about this arrangement. And Grandma split everything 50-50. I have the documentation. We discussed this extensively when you were both in college, Mom chimed in from the background, her voice tight. Melissa was supposed to get the house fund. It was understood. I bought this house with my savings from my job. I said, my voice rising with each word. I didn't use any inheritance money. I can prove every single deposit came from my paychecks at Summit Capital. Nevertheless, Dad continued, his tone icy, we believe you were aware of the family arrangement and deliberately went against it. We'll be filing a petition with the court tomorrow morning. Our lawyer, Howard Greenberg, will be in contact with you. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Claire's eyes were wide with shock. Did your parents just threaten to sue you over a house you bought with your own money? She asked slowly. I nodded, still processing what had just happened. Apparently, they think I somehow stole Melissa's inheritance. But Claire, I swear to you on everything, there was never any arrangement like that. Not once in my entire life did anyone mention this. Then why would they? Because, came a voice from the hallway. It was Cameron, Claire's fiancé and a junior attorney at Westfield and Partners downtown. He'd apparently been listening from the kitchen. They probably want the house for your sister, and they're using this inheritance story as leverage to pressure you into giving it up or selling it to her. He walked over and sat down on the coffee table across from us, his expression serious. Linda, I'm going to be straight with you. You're going to need a really good lawyer, because from what I just overheard, your family's about to wage war. The next morning, I sat in a sleek conference room at Crawford Legal Associates, meeting with Diane Montgomery, an attorney Cameron had recommended who specialized in family property disputes and estate law. So your parents are claiming there was a verbal agreement that your sister would receive funds specifically for purchasing a home? Diane asked, making notes on her tablet with swift, precise strokes. Yes, but no such agreement ever existed, I insisted, fighting to keep my voice steady. I used my own savings from 6 years of working as a financial analyst. I can prove every dollar came from my paychecks. I have bank statements, tax returns, everything. Diane nodded approvingly. That's excellent. What about the inheritance from your grandparents? How exactly was that distributed? It was split evenly between me and Melissa. We each received $38,000. Melissa used hers to buy a new Audi and take a trip to Bali with her friends. I used mine to pay off my student loans and start an emergency fund. Was there any documentation in the will stating specific purposes for how the inheritance should be used? Diane asked, leaning forward. No, I said firmly. The will simply divided everything between me and Melissa equally. No conditions, no stipulations about houses or anything else. Diane tapped her stylus against her tablet thoughtfully. Your parents' case sounds extremely weak from a legal standpoint, but family courts can be unpredictable. Judges sometimes try to find middle ground even when there isn't one. We need to understand their exact claim and gather compelling counter-evidence. Later that afternoon, I called my Uncle Raymond, my father's younger brother who lived in Denver. Linda, how's the new house treating you? He answered cheerfully. Your Aunt Susan and I are planning to visit next month. Actually, Uncle Raymond, that's kind of why I'm calling. Did Dad ever mention any arrangement about Melissa getting Grandma's inheritance specifically for a house? A long pause followed. I could hear traffic in the background. No, he finally said slowly. But your dad has always favored Melissa. You know that, honey. Ever since she was born, she could do no wrong in his eyes. But nothing specific about inheritance money being earmarked for her to buy a house? Not that I recall. Why are you asking? I took a deep breath. They're taking me to court, Uncle Raymond. They're claiming I somehow stole Melissa's house money. What? That's absolutely ridiculous. His voice rose sharply. Linda, listen to me carefully. There was never any such arrangement in your grandparents' will. I was there when the attorney read it at Grandpa's office. Everything was split 50-50. Period. Would you be willing to sign an affidavit stating that? Absolutely. Your grandmother would be horrified by what they're doing. She always treated you both equally, that was important to her. My next call was to Aunt Joanna, who had lived with my grandparents during their final years, helping care for them. Oh Linda, she sighed heavily after I explained the situation. I was afraid something like this might happen. My heart started pounding. What do you mean? Your father approached your grandparents about changing their will to give Melissa a larger share about 8 months before your grandmother passed away. He wanted them to earmark money specifically for Melissa's future home. Your grandmother refused point blank. I gripped the phone tighter. Dad tried to get them to change the will? Yes. He claimed Melissa needed more help because her career prospects weren't as strong as yours. That you had your finance job and didn't need as much support. Your grandmother was furious. She said both her granddaughters were getting equal shares, and she wouldn't play favorites. She told him that if he couldn't accept that, he didn't have to be present at the will reading. Why didn't you tell me this before? I didn't want to cause family drama, Aunt Joanna said quietly. But if they're taking you to court with this fabricated story, someone needs to tell the truth. Would you need me to testify about this conversation if it comes to that? Would you be willing to? Of course, sweetheart. Your grandmother would want me to. I've got your back. My final stop was my cousin Whitney's apartment in the city. She and Melissa had always been close, practically sisters growing up. I don't want to get involved in this, Whitney said immediately after opening her apartment door, her arms crossed defensively. I just need to understand what's happening, I pleaded. Please, Whitney. We've known each other our whole lives. She sighed heavily and stepped aside. Fine, come in. But I'm not taking sides. We sat at her small kitchen table, mugs of coffee growing cold between us as the afternoon light filtered through her blinds. Melissa's been talking about that house in Maplewood Gardens for almost a year, Whitney finally admitted, not meeting my eyes. She said your parents promised to help her buy it once she made paralegal at Sterling and Rhodes. My stomach dropped. The exact house I bought? Whitney nodded uncomfortably. She had a whole Pinterest board for renovations, custom kitchen, master bathroom remodel, the works. When she found out you'd bought it, she completely lost it. She called me crying for 3 hours straight. But Whitney, that house was never promised to her. I didn't even know she was interested in it. I found it through my own realtor search. Maybe not explicitly promised, Whitney said, fidgeting with her coffee mug. But your parents have always given Melissa whatever she wanted. Remember when she wanted that Audi? They co-signed the loan, even though she couldn't really afford it. When she wanted to go to Bali, they gave her extra money beyond the inheritance. I think they just assumed they could arrange something with your grandparents' money to make this happen too. But there was no specific house money for Melissa in the inheritance. The will was clear. Try telling that to your sister, Whitney muttered. She's convinced herself that money was rightfully hers. She keeps saying you betrayed the family. I leaned forward, desperate. Whitney, I need allies here. My own family is trying to take away something I worked 6 years to afford. Whitney met my eyes, and I saw genuine conflict there. I'll tell you what I know, Linda. I'll tell you the truth. But I won't testify against them in court. I can't. Melissa's my cousin too, and my mom would never forgive me. Fair enough. Just tell me this. Have you ever heard anyone besides my parents or Melissa mention this supposed arrangement about house money? Never, Whitney said firmly, shaking her head. Not once. Not from your grandparents when they were alive. Not from any other relatives. This all started after your grandmother died, when your dad started talking about how Melissa needed more help. As I drove back to Claire's place, where I'd been staying since this nightmare began, I called Diane. I think I understand what happened, I told her, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. My parents promised my sister my house, or at least a house, without having the means to deliver. Now they're trying to fix their mistake by taking mine from me. Then let's make absolutely certain they fail, Diane replied, her voice sharp with determination. Meet me tomorrow morning at 9. We're going to build a defense they can't tear down. 1 week later, we gathered for court-ordered mediation at Crawford Legal Associates conference room. My parents, Melissa, and their attorney, Howard Greenberg, sat across from Diane and me. The tension so thick I could barely breathe. We're here because my daughter stole her sister's rightful inheritance, Dad declared before the mediator, Mr. Foster, could even begin the proceedings. Greenberg slid a folder across the polished table. We have documentation of the verbal agreement regarding Melissa's inheritance allocation for the specific purpose of purchasing a home. Documentation of a verbal agreement. Diane raised an eyebrow. That's contradictory by definition. Witness statements, Greenberg clarified smoothly. From family members present during these discussions. I grabbed the folder and flipped it open. Inside were statements from my parents Melissa, and Aunt Beverly, my mother's sister, who I'd barely spoken to in 5 years and who hadn't even attended Grandma's funeral. Linda, honey, Mom said softly, her eyes pleading. You know that money was meant for your sister's house. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I met her gaze steadily. No, Mum. There was never any such arrangement. You're lying. How dare you call us liars? Melissa snapped, her face flushing red. We talked about this for years. Everyone knew. We never did, I replied, keeping my voice level despite my racing heart. Not once. You're rewriting history because you never listen. Melissa's voice rose sharply. You've always been so wrapped up in your perfect finance job and your perfect savings plan. You never cared about what I needed. Dad leaned forward, his expression hardening. Linda, be reasonable. Your sister needs this house more than you do. You can find another one. You make good money. That's what this is really about, I said, the realization crystallizing. Not some imaginary agreement. You promised Melissa something that wasn't yours to give, and now you're trying to take it from me to cover your mistake. Melissa slammed her hand on the conference table, making the water glasses jump. It's not a lie. Grandma always said I would get help with a house. She told me that herself. Then why isn't it in her will? I demanded. Why did she refuse when Dad asked her to change it? The room fell into shocked silence. Greenberg glanced at my parents with surprise. Diane smoothly presented our evidence folder. We have signed affidavits from Raymond Collins and Joanna Porter, both present at the will reading, confirming no such arrangement existed. We also have complete bank records showing every dollar of Linda's down payment came from her earned income at Summit Capital Group over 6 years. Not 1 cent came from inheritance money. This isn't about the money source, Greenberg argued, recovering his composure. It's about family agreements and expectations. It's about my parents promising my sister my grandparents' money without their knowledge or consent, I interrupted. And when Grandma refused to change her will, they decided to fabricate this story to take my house. Linda, Mom's voice cracked. We're your family. We're just trying to make things right. Right for who? I asked. Not for me. Not for Grandma and Grandpa, who wanted us treated equally. You could just buy another house, Melissa suggested suddenly, her tone shifting to something almost pleading. I've been dreaming about that specific house for 2 years. The neighborhood, the layout, everything. Please, Linda. I stared at my sister, this person who was supposed to be my ally, my friend, and felt something inside me break completely. You mean the sister who posted lies about me on social media before even talking to me? I said coldly. The sister who's trying to steal something I worked 6 years to afford. Dad's face darkened, his jaw clenching. This isn't who we raised you to be, Linda. You raised me to work hard, save money, and be honest, I shot back. What happened to those values? Enough. Dad slammed his fist on the table, making everyone jump. We'll let a judge decide this. As they stood to leave, Dad pointed directly at me. You're making a catastrophic mistake. I have connections in this town, Linda. Colleagues, friends in important places. By the time we're done, you'll wish you'd never bought that house. Is that a threat? Diane asked sharply, her pen poised over her notepad. It's a promise, he replied before storming out, Mom and Melissa following behind him. Greenberg gathered his papers quickly, avoiding eye contact. The mediator sighed heavily. I think we can safely say mediation has failed. The time between mediation and trial was brutal. Dad had followed through on his threat, spreading rumors about me in professional circles, claiming I'd stolen from family. My supervisor at Summit Capital called me into her office twice to ask if everything was okay at home. Clients I'd worked with for years suddenly seemed distant during meetings. But the worst came 2 weeks before the trial date. I was working late at the office when Claire called, her voice panicked. Linda, you need to get home right now. Your sister's at your house. What? How did she? I don't know, but she's trying to get inside. I'm watching from my car across the street. She has a key or something. Should I call the police? Yes. Call them now. By the time I arrived, 2 police officers were standing on my front porch with Melissa, who was crying hysterically. This is my house, she sobbed. My parents gave me a key. Linda stole it from me. Ma'am, according to the property records, this home belongs to Linda Collins, one of the officers said patiently. Do you have documentation proving otherwise? The lawsuit. We have a lawsuit. Ask my parents. The officer turned to me. Ms. Collins, do you know this woman? She's my sister, I said quietly. I don't know where she got that key, but I never gave her permission to be here. I want to press charges, I added, my voice stronger. For trespassing. Melissa's face went white. You wouldn't. You just tried to break into my house, I said. After your family dragged me to court with lies. Yes, I would. The officer nodded. Ma'am, you're under arrest for criminal trespassing. As they led Melissa away in handcuffs, still crying, Mom's car screeched into the driveway. What have you done? Mom screamed, running toward me. She's your sister. How could you have her arrested? How could you raise her to think this was acceptable? I replied calmly, though my heart was pounding. She tried to break into my home, Mom. What did you expect me to do? We're family. No, I said quietly. Family doesn't do this to each other. The next morning, Diane called with an update. The trespassing charge significantly weakens their case. It demonstrates a pattern of entitlement and boundary violation. Judge Francine Harper will take this into consideration. Will it be enough? Linda, their entire case rests on verbal agreements that multiple witnesses have contradicted under oath. Your financial records are impeccable. Unless they pull a rabbit out of a hat, you're going to win this. But doubt still gnawed at me. What if the judge felt sorry for Melissa? What if family connections mattered more than facts? The night before trial, I couldn't sleep. I walked through my house, my beautiful craftsman home with the original hardwood floors I'd refinished myself, the kitchen where I'd installed new cabinet hardware, the living room I'd painted a warm sage green. This was mine. Every inch of it bought with my own sweat and sacrifice. I wouldn't let them take it. 3 months after that disastrous mediation, we gathered in the county courthouse. Judge Francine Harper, a stern woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun, addressed the courtroom after hearing both sides present their arguments. I've reviewed all the evidence presented, she began, her voice cutting through the silent courtroom. The will of Margaret and Harold Stevens divided their estate equally between their 2 granddaughters with no stipulations or conditions. There is no written evidence of any verbal agreement regarding Melissa Collins receiving funds specifically for a home purchase. She continued, adjusting her glasses. Furthermore, Linda Collins purchased her property at 742 Birch Lane using verifiably earned income from her employment. Bank records confirm this unequivocally. My heart pounded as she paused. I find the plaintiff's conduct deeply troubling, particularly the attempted unauthorized entry to the defendant's property, which resulted in criminal trespassing charges. The testimony from Raymond Collins and Joanna Porter directly contradicts the plaintiff's claims and establishes that the deceased, Margaret Stevens, explicitly rejected attempts to alter her will in favor of one granddaughter over the other. Judge Harper's gaze swept across the courtroom, landing briefly on my parents. What we have here is not a legitimate inheritance dispute, but rather an attempt by the plaintiffs to manufacture a legal claim to remedy a private family promise they had no authority to make. The court will not participate in such maneuvering. She straightened her papers. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Ms. Linda Collins is entitled to recoup reasonable legal fees from the plaintiffs, which I'm setting at $12,000. Additionally, I'm issuing a protective order preventing the plaintiffs from contacting Ms. Collins or approaching her property for a period of 1 year, with exceptions for emergencies verified by law enforcement. The gavel came down with a sharp crack. I felt Claire grab my hand and squeeze it tightly. Diane gave me a subtle nod, a small smile on her face. Across the aisle, Melissa was crying into Mom's shoulder. Dad's face was stone, but I could see his jaw working, his hands clenched into fists. Outside the courthouse, the autumn air felt crisp and clean. Claire hugged me tightly as my family approached across the parking lot. Linda, please, Mom said, reaching for my arm with trembling hands. We need to talk as a family. We can fix this. I stepped back, putting space between us. We tried that. You chose a courtroom instead. We made a mistake, Dad admitted, his voice strained. We got caught up in trying to help Melissa. We thought you could bully me into giving up what I earned? I interrupted. You thought I'd just roll over because you're my parents? Melissa stepped forward, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I'm sorry, Linda. I really am. I genuinely thought that house was supposed to be mine. I thought you knew and bought it anyway. Because they told you that, I said, feeling the anger drain away, replaced by exhaustion and sadness. They made promises they had no right to make and couldn't keep. Can't we move past this? Mom pleaded, her voice breaking. We're family. Families forgive each other. Family doesn't drag each other to court over fabricated stories, I replied quietly. Family doesn't threaten each other or try to break into each other's homes. Family doesn't spread professional rumors to damage each other's careers. So that's it? Dad demanded, his face flushing. You're throwing away 32 years of family over one disagreement? This wasn't a disagreement, Dad. It was a betrayal, I said firmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. And yes, some things can't be undone. Some lines, once crossed, change everything. What do you want from us? Melissa asked desperately. An apology? Money? What more can I do? I don't want anything from you anymore, I said quietly. That's the point. I just want to move forward with my life. Diane approached from behind me, her heels clicking on the courthouse steps. My client's friends are waiting to celebrate. You should leave now. This isn't the end of this conversation, Dad insisted, his voice rising. Actually, it is, Diane interjected coolly. The protective order is already in effect. Any further attempts at contact could result in contempt charges. I suggest you consult with Mr. Greenberg about the implications. That evening, my true support system gathered at my house. My house. Claire and Cameron, Uncle Raymond who had flown in from Denver, Aunt Joanna, and close friends from work, including my supervisor Amanda, who'd stood by me through the professional rumors. We sat in the living room I'd painted soft sage green, eating takeout from Antonio's Pizzeria, laughing and sharing stories. A toast, Uncle Raymond announced, raising his glass of wine. To Linda, who stood her ground when it would have been easier to fold. Your grandparents would be incredibly proud. I still can't believe they actually took you to court, Claire said, shaking her head. Your own parents. What will you do now? Aunt Joanna asked gently. They're still your family, despite everything. I looked around at the people who had stood by me through everything, who had believed me, supported me, testified for me. Family isn't just about blood, I said slowly. It's about respect, honesty, and support. These people, you all, you're my real family. So you're cutting them off completely? Cameron asked. For now, yes. Maybe someday they'll understand what they did wrong. Maybe someday they'll offer a real apology. But I won't hold my breath, and I won't let them back in until I'm ready. Any second thoughts about the house? Claire asked. I smiled, looking around at the walls I'd painted, the floors I'd refinished, the home I'd built with my own hands and my own money. None whatsoever. This house represents everything I've worked for and everything I've learned about standing up for myself. Uncle Raymond raised his glass again. To new beginnings. The house keys sat on the coffee table, solid, real, and undeniably mine. 3 months later, I was trimming the hedges in my front yard when a car I didn't recognize pulled up to the curb. For a moment, my heart jumped. Was it them? But then a young couple stepped out, looking at the house next door with a realtor. Beautiful neighborhood, the woman said, noticing me. She had kind eyes and an easy smile. It really is, I replied, setting down my pruning shears. Are you thinking of moving in next door? Maybe. We're just starting to look. I'm Grace, by the way. This is my husband, Trevor. Linda. Welcome to Maplewood Gardens. As we chatted about the neighborhood, the best coffee shop on the corner, the farmer's market every Saturday, the annual block party, I realized something had shifted inside me. The knot of anxiety that had lived in my chest for months had finally loosened. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. My phone buzzed, a text from Claire. Dinner this weekend? Cameron wants to try that new steakhouse downtown. Absolutely, I typed back. My treat. Still celebrating. The maple tree in my backyard rustled in the breeze, its leaves just beginning to turn autumn colors. In a few weeks, I'd need to rake them. In a few months, I'd be planning where to plant tulip bulbs for spring. These were the thoughts of a homeowner. Of someone building a life, not defending one. My phone buzzed again. This time, an unknown number. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won. Linda, it's Whitney. I know you probably don't want to hear from any of us, but I wanted you to know, Melissa moved to Chicago. New job, fresh start. Mom and Dad aren't talking about the lawsuit anymore. I think they're ashamed. I just thought you should know. You were right about everything. I'm sorry I didn't say it in court. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, thank you for telling me. I hope Melissa finds what she's looking for. Take care of yourself, Whitney. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever. But it was closure. A door gently closed rather than slammed shut. As darkness fell and the porch light automatically flickered on, a feature I'd installed myself just last week, I pulled out my laptop. I'd been thinking about starting a blog, sharing my story. Not for revenge or vindication, but because I knew there were others out there fighting similar battles. People being told to sacrifice their own achievements for family peace. People being made to feel selfish for protecting what they'd earned. I opened a blank document and began to type, my parents took me to court for buying a house. That house belongs to your sister, they said. The words flowed easily now, no longer weighted with fear or uncertainty. This was my story, and I was finally ready to own it, every painful, triumphant, life-changing moment. Just like I owned this house. Just like I owned my future. The cursor blinked on the screen, waiting for the next sentence. I smiled and kept writing, the sound of my fingers on the keyboard mixing with the cricket's evening song and the distant laughter of neighbors enjoying their own autumn evening. This was home. This was peace. This was mine. And no one could ever take that away.